look at sweet mama watching me play guitar. She got long black hair and she's smoking on a fat cigar.
Hey, everybody, that was Jeff Pitchell's Fat Cigar you were listening to. And that means it's time for Not Just Blowing Smoke. And not just blowing smoke, it's our 4th anniversary show. 4 years of doing this every freaking week.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been a long, fun ride. We're happy to do it. And if you are streaming us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening after the fact on Podbean, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Google's, iTunes, Amazon, wherever else you get the podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't ever miss a thing. I'm Pastor Padron. I'm here with all of my co-hosts this week. This is great. I've got Pat. I've got Nick. I've got Dave. And we have 2 very special guests this week. We have Jeremy Reeves, the master blender for Cornell and Diehl.
Yeah, baby.
And
The master.
the warlock, Kaz Walters from Laudisi Distribution Group, who basically is the guy who sells Jeremy's stuff.
Basically.
People like me.
That's
Make
right.
people buy James.
Yeah. You don't have
does-
to make
he
it's
does-
not a hard sell.
Yeah,
Just
no, it is
It's
not.
not a hard sell.
It's
Well,
like
it's not a hard sell at all. Because I just go in and I said, Dan, you're going to buy this.
Dan, I
And he said,
did.
yes, Mr. Warlock. Yes,
I just
sir.
sent you 2 cases. I hope that's okay. I guess it is.
It's like, hey, can I get a case? I'm like, you got 2 on the way, buddy.
Oh, thank you, Kaz. Yeah. So, and we're actually going to start the show smoking this cigar here. If you don't recognize it, this is the Stillwell Star from Dunbarton Tobacco Trust. And this is the Holiday 2022 edition of the cigar. And Stillwell Star was a cigar that was developed by Steve Saka and Jeremy Reeves. And it utilizes pipe tobacco in the filler, correct?
That's correct.
And this particular thing, let me read this quote I got from Mr. Saka. Now, last year we had both Jeremy and Steve Saka on the show. And I love Steve, but Jeremy was not able to talk much on that episode. And so here we're doing a Stillwell Star again, but we're going to get Jeremy's take on it this time, which I'm looking forward to. But regarding specifically the holiday blend, Steve said, a tradition in pipe culture is for carvers to craft one-off pipe designs and for blenders to create special mixtures to smoke and celebrate the holidays. In honor of this practice, it's always been my intention to follow suit within our Stillwell Star line of puros. This year's release is a delightful aromatic puro with a carefully balanced selection of mild Cavendish Burley and choice Virginia tobaccos incorporated. Unlike the aromatic number 1 in the core line, this holiday release, again the 2022, does not feature a dulce cabeza, which is real fancy talk for sweet cap.
It's not fancy
Why he
talk.
can't
It's
talk about
Spanish.
sweet cap?
I mean, what are you talking about, Danny?
Call it what it is. It's a sweetened cap. It's a sweetened cap. If you talk to a Drew Estate guy, yeah, sweet cap, double sweet cap. Yeah. No, dulce cabeza. However, the tobaccos themselves are wonderfully sweet to the tongue. The flavor and aroma are nothing short of exceptional. Personally, I find the smoking experience to be like sipping a cup of hot chocolate with marshmallows fireside.
I mean, I get it. I get the sweetness where it's like that, a light sweetness, almost like you would be, eating marshmallows by the fire.
Yeah.
Drinking.
Yeah, there's definitely like an illusion of marshmallows and a
Illusion.
illusion, not illusion.
Not like Andalusian.
It alludes.
No.
So there's no bull in this.
No, nor is any of this from Spain. Am I aware? Andalusia is in Spain. Anyway, so
Moving on.
There's no Dolce.
there is a slight
Is there a
chocolatey
sweet
note
cap?
there. Not that I'm aware of. Not that I detect. There's a slight chocolatey note there,
It's a nice.
but definitely the marshmallow to me is more upfront. And
Yeah.
even more than flavor, like
Marshmallow.
it's easy to sometimes
Marshmallow.
like confuse flavor with texture sometimes because like taste is subjective and definitely a mental thing. But like there's a certain like really rich creaminess that is also reminiscent to cocoa that goes really well with the flavor.
Oh yeah.
True. And this cigar features a Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, Mexican San Andreas binder, and then a mix of tobacco. You want to talk about the tobaccos that are in the filler?
Sure. So it's a blend of black Cavendish, white burley, just a touch of dark burley, and some red Virginia, and then a series of sort of flavor enhancements that we've used.
Flavor enhancements.
Crack.
Yeah. Fresh cracked. It's fresh cracked.
Freshly cracked flavor enhancements. For
You know,
your palate
He has a little
pleasure.
pepper grinder he uses when he blends.
Ooh. All right.
Yeah, I
Some
suppose.
sazon.
So the
Easy.
I get where folks are coming from with the marshmallow, but I actually am picking up a maple.
Ooh. That's interesting.
Is that because that's what you actually used? Can't say.
Magic.
Just flavor enhancements.
Just flavor
Yeah,
enhancements.
no toppings or
Notes-
casings here. Just
Notes
flavor
of-
enhancements.
Notes of maple.
This I don't know. This gives me like a coconut flavored marshmallow.
I could see that.
Yeah, I can
That's
see that
interesting. Coconut flavored marshmallow.
Cream.
Cream of
Like
coconut.
too.
what
It's
am I
definitely creamy.
It is for sure. It is.
like? I could see like if you take the almonds out of like an almond joy, it's like a Mounds with milk chocolate. Like there is that sort of.
Well, that's no fun.
I'll be.
I mean,
afraid.
sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you
No, you
don't. Well,
You're no, we won't go there.
coward.
Come on, Danny.
Calling me a coward.
Ooh.
That's bold.
Cow of the ward.
Yeah.
I mean, prove me wrong.
I will
The silence.
in my own time.
I just am expecting
That's
you to
that's
just
what.
leap across the table right now.
Get over here! It's a $120 keyboard.
While I'm sure that I would be like embarrassed and in the moment it would be horrifying to see the pastor flying towards me, I don't know if anything would make me feel more respect for him than I already do than him doing that.
That would
If
be.
that's
know.
not a dare, Dan, I don't know what
don't-
it is.
If I came
Respect
at,
your fellow man.
if I came at you like that, I'd probably end up going out the window and really hurting myself.
Oh, you'd both be going out the window.
I
I'd
am
be
a nimble
holding
guy.
both of you guys.
His head would be out the window, and
Oh.
he'd be sitting there all.
It would
I'm a
be-
pretty nimble guy. I think I could get away quickly enough.
I'm not
I
sure.
hope so. My God. That would be a sight to see right there. My God.
So, did Steve approach you with this idea for doing this cigar? How did
Or did
this-
you approach him? Or were you guys-
No, it was Steve's idea, and in fact, Steve has been doing something similar to Stillwell, just for his own personal, for a long time. Because he's been a pipe smoker, just sort of like in secret, prior to the Stillwell Star thing. He started smoking a pipe while he was in the Navy, because pipes and pipe tobacco were more affordable than the cost of a good cigar, and so he had kind of started in tobacco really with pipe smoking, and then transitioned to cigars when he could more easily afford it. But pipes had already really been, a part of his smoking routine. But when he got into manufacturing on the cigar side and traveling down to Nicaragua, he began taking down pipe tobaccos that he was fond of smoking, and having some of the rollers try different blends using some of his pipe tobacco in with long filler
Okay.
cigar tobacco, so that he
Sprinkle,
could
sprinkle, sprinkle.
exactly so that he could enjoy some of the tobaccos that he liked to smoke in a pipe
Wow.
in an environment where he didn't want to be seen smoking a pipe. He wanted to be seen smoking a cigar because he's Steve Saka.
All right, let's stop right there.
So-
What is the deal with the shame of the pipe smoker?
It's not a
Like you can't.
It's not
If I'm not
shame.
smoking a cigar, I'm not really smoking.
I can-
So, like, what I've experienced is it is not on, it's not ubiquitous, I don't think, in either side, but I do think it's on both sides. Like, pipe smokers, like, there's a lot of pipe smokers who are exclusively pipe smokers, and, like, there's a lot of cigar smokers who are exclusively cigar smokers.
Right.
And these little, like, factions in these two sides don't get the other. And then you have plenty that do both. And
I definitely go both ways.
like there is a risk, not in a bad way, not denigrating anybody, but there is a risk of alienating a decent amount of like a customer base. Like it almost like to these hardline cigar guys, it almost like it's not correct, but it almost in their mind like lowers the credibility of you being a cigar guy.
Sure. Well, I mean, he owns a cigar brand. He's trying to, he's not trying to smoke some other thing.
Yeah, I can say too,
You know.
like even from talking to Saka, like he will only smoke his own stuff in public, and if you give him something to try, like he won't even tell you he tried it, but he'll go home and have it. Like I've never seen him, and from what everyone else has told me, and then just from talking to him, like if he's in public, he has this big case of Dunbarton, and that's all he's smoking.
He's
And
smoking
Yeah,
his
no,
the
cigar.
pipe
that's
tobacco
true.
is not Dunbarton. He's not smoking it.
there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, he, like you said, he owns
Yeah.
DTT. So I mean,
It's not an unreasonable assumption for someone, and not just with Steve, for someone who works for a brand or owns a brand and they're seen in public not smoking something they produce.
right?
There are some people who will make the unfair assumption that, oh, well, he doesn't even prefer the stuff he's putting out.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet we all know that's baloney.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
We
Of
all
course.
know it's baloney. I mean,
But
especially if you're a pipe smoker. I mean, you smoke everybody's stuff.
Sure.
You know, I mean, it's been great collaborating with you on the Briary blends for Twin Smoke Shop. We have 5 different blends, and they've become a lot of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not all that I smoke, and I don't feel bad, and I don't feel bad. You know, it's like Kurt having 724, and yeah, a lot of times you see him smoke 724, but it's not the only thing he smokes.
Right.
And so I get the logic. I don't want to be smoking public something that I'm trying to build. Of course. You know, when you're trying to build your brand, you don't want to be smoking something else. And
He also doesn't own a cigar shop,
I
justifies.
Yeah,
I
that's-
also-
that's correct.
kind
He
of-
owns a
it's-
brand.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I also get, he's now. I think on the last show he made the exception for us, but he's told in the past. Steve has told me he will not smoke a pipe on the show because he doesn't want it to hurt his brand. And now he did the last time we were on. We did
Well, he's also smoked a
Black
pipe,
Frigate, right?
and he smoked a pipe at PCA, but only because
Now that the
Now that it's out,
yes, only because it's still
cat's out of the bag, yeah.
yeah, correct.
you know.
And I can understand that. I mean, as head blender of C&D, like I really don't smoke anything else. I didn't before I worked at C&D either. Pretty much everything I smoked was a C&D product. But we've got a very large line,
Yeah.
Got a huge,
and
huge line.
we're always trying to do something fresh, and I don't get a whole lot of time to smoke just for fun, to smoke just for pleasure. And so yeah, I can honestly say, like, I'm not smoking a lot of other pipe tobacco brands. There are some things that have been in my cellar for a long time, and there are some things that I still seek out, but as a general rule, I'm smoking C&D. So I totally get where Steve is coming from. Rep what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. I just, I'm one of these, and I know that I am. I'm one of these cigar smokers that enjoys pipes, or a pipe smoker that enjoys cigars. I don't really care which you say. For me, it's 2 different kinds of things. It's like if cigars are bourbon, and pipes are wine, sometimes you feel like a glass of wine.
Sure.
And you offer me bourbon, and it goes, that's not really what I'm up for, and vice versa. And it's just two different experiences, two different kinds of tastes and flavors, two different kinds of what's the word I want to use?
Sometimes you feel like a nut, and sometimes you don't.
I would say
back
sometimes
around.
I feel like a pipe, sometimes I don't. It's
Oh, we
No,
definitely
it's
You
two
know-
totally different
Yeah.
scratches for two totally different itches. Like
Correct.
sometimes I feel like just a nice greasy burger, and sometimes I want like filet mignon or like something else, ice cream. Like, and if you want that,
That's
the other's not going to satisfy
Right,
that itch. There's
right.
room for both. Like I smoke a pipe all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I smoke cigars all the time, and it's based on the occasion, what I'm craving.
Yep.
Like that's the one misconception that I encounter a lot when I travel to shops and talk to my account's customers is they think it's like a team.
Mm-hmm.
You
No.
pick one or the other. I'm like, not only is that not true,
Mm-hmm.
I personally find it impossible.
Mm.
Like, no,
Yeah.
like there's not only is there room for both or can there be room for both,
Mm-hmm.
it to me is the fact that if you give both a shot, you're not going to want to choose one.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
going to enjoy both thoroughly
Yes.
because they're two totally different experiences.
Yes, for
Yes.
sure.
I agree
And
with
two
that.
different kinds of ritual
Mhm.
that goes along with it. too.
Absolutely. I always say that
Absolutely.
I've smoked cigars in private all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I find cigars particularly suited for a social environment.
Yes, they're a
Where
much more social.
pipes are more of a solitary thing. Now, I've smoked pipes in a group with people before, but those sort of social interactions are usually more relaxed, more intimate in a way, like you're just hanging with friends around a fire or just in somebody's living room or their patio. Whereas, like, if you're at the lounge here and stuff, like, it's a little bit louder, it's a little bit more higher energy, and that's a cigar environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least to me.
Yeah.
I concur.
So, how did you and Steve work out this particular blend for the 2022?
Well, we had already done the other blends that made up the core line of Stillwell Star, and by this point, it pretty much Steve kind of knew that he wanted to do something in the aromatic family.
Right.
And he gave me a couple of keynotes that he was interested in seeing how those would do.
Right.
And so I just sent him samples as I had with all of these others.
Right.
Like, I'm not working with him on putting together the cigar. He's not working with me on putting together the pipe tobacco.
So, did you send him pipe tobacco, or
Yes.
did you send him a cigar with the pipe tobacco in it?
I wouldn't have the way to do that because we don't have a cigar rolling
Okay.
setup. So yeah, that was the whole way that this project worked, starting from Steve's practice, bringing pipe tobacco down to Nika, and then having the rollers add a little bit of pipe tobacco to his cigars. So this was the same concept, just getting the tobacco from us.
Was it added as like how they bunch a cigar? Like, was it a whole leaf, or were they like literally sprinkling stuff that was already
No,
done?
it is pipe tobacco in the same forms that we produce pipe tobacco in, added in small amounts to the filler.
Oh wow!
In a way that'll burn evenly, and all, which is impressive. So this is something I'm not sure of. When Steve approaches you about a new blend, whether it's a holiday release or the original core line, particularly with like the English and the aromatic or the navy or this, does he come and say, I'm wanting an aromatic, and you like work something that you think would be good for a cigar? Or does he say the general flavor profile or the types of cigar leaf that I'm going to use for this cigar are X, and this is the aromatic flavor or the English flavor that I want to complement this?
So there have been instances where he's like, I want to do something, fuller bodied, or I want to do something that has a particular mouthfeel. and I'm looking for things that will pair with that, but that can go a lot of different directions. Send me a bunch of things that you think would work with whatever characteristic we're talking about. In this instance, what he asked was, he knew he wanted something that was going to be aromatic, and he gave me kind of a gist of like some things that he thought would be good. And then I put together a series of samples and sent those to him. And then he had cigars made using a blend that he was kind of working out, like, okay, this needs to come up, this needs to come down. But yeah, basically the pipe tobacco, he went through and found things that worked, and then came back to me and was like, okay, I think this works, but it needs this tweak. And so I would send him.
So like with this, he'd go like, I'm making a holiday blend, so like I need something with this type of body and strength of flavor, and like flavors that are reminiscent to like a holiday sort of thing. Okay, so how long? I mean, that doesn't sound too dissimilar to the process with making the 724 blends. Like there's a lot of back and forth with samples and making adjustments,
Correct.
until there's something that the guys here at 724 like they're happy with. How long on average does that process like take for a Stillwell?
For this holiday, I think it was all told about 8 months from the time that we started discussion to the time that we had something. It was in production and it was released.
That's like remarkably like much shorter of a time period, I think, than any of us or most people would expect.
Yeah, no, I would
Because
think that's
having
crazy.
to send it back and forth between Nicaragua and like not only balance the pipe tobacco component, but balance the cigar blend and make them come together in harmony, manufacture enough for a release,
How
age
you want to
them.
put it in the cigar? Like,
Yeah.
where do you know?
And like that's why I mentioned burning rate. Like if you're taking a ribbon cut tobacco that burns at on average a faster rate because it's smaller surface area and such as that, and then you got this whole leaf tobacco around it to get an even burn. Like not just the flavors have to be in balance, but the construction too.
For sure. What are y'all thinking of the cigar right now?
My mind is just blown about how well it smokes, knowing how it was made. You know?
Oh yeah,
That's just
absolutely.
crazy.
So there's, I believe, about 2 grams of pipe tobacco in the filler, but the total weight of the cigar is like 18 grams. So, yeah.
And the average pipe bowl is about 3 grams of tobacco, right?
Yes.
So you're getting like a small bowl of pipe tobacco in every cigar.
That's nice.
That puts it in perspective. When you hear 2 grams, you're like, oh, that's a really small amount. But if you say that, you know, a small bowl of pipe tobacco is about that helps put a picture to it, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely.
But
Because
they're
I
really
thought it
laying,
was smaller by the way I was thinking about it.
laying those leaves and nestling parts of the blend in and amid so that you get a consistent burn.
Oh yeah.
As the leaf is burning, it's like, you know, these ribbon cut tobaccos are added and kind of like gently rolled in. It takes a long time.
That's an art form.
That's
right there.
insane.
Not only
Yeah.
consistent burn, but you're never so far, and I've smoked plenty of Stillwells and have never experienced this, which I think speaks to the brilliance of the blend, but also the construction. Not only is it a consistent burn, but there's never a spot in these cigars that I'm not tasting pipe tobacco, but I'm also not tasting. There's no like dead spots for either profile.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's consistent in the flavor and the burn.
Yeah, the way it smokes is like everything was a long leaf.
Yes.
Yes.
Never would have guessed that there was ribbon cut tobacco in this at all. Ever.
I would
That's
say it
amazing.
speaks to Hoya because that's the factory
that's exactly right.
manufacturing.
Yep.
Like, it's like, in my opinion, I think it's the best factory. Period. Consistency wise.
Well, it definitely shows with something like this.
Yeah,
Yes, I
absolutely.
agree.
Now, we're all pairing this with the 724 Barrel Select Woodford Reserve. How are you guys thinking that this bourbon goes with this particular cigar? Personally, I think it's a winner. I think the sweetness in the Woodford is just totally bringing out those sweeter, darker notes whether it's, you are picking up cocoa or maple. I think it's the same kind of thing, but it really enhances it to
The
me.
fruity nature that I'm getting, while it's subtle, from the Woodford. And I know you got 2 grams of pipe tobacco in here, so the amount of dark burley in that is even smaller. But it, to me, amps up those chocolate notes, not just from the aromatic, but things that I have smoked. I've smoked a good bit of like dark burley straight. I enjoy it. And I pick up more on the dark burley flavor profile itself with the bourbon.
Interesting.
Like that dark, unsweetened cocoa wine sort of thing. Like
Yes.
it really brings it out.
Yep. The powerful marshmallow sweetness that I got in the beginning kind of toned down a little bit. That chocolate, almost that hot chocolate kind of taste came up, so everything is really even, really balanced in there, and it's just really smooth. You still get the sweetness, but it's not as potent as it was in the beginning. But it's really like toned down. But it's, for me, it's everything is just straight across the board. Everything's blending really nice together. It's really, really tasty.
Now, Kaz, I saw you smoke your glass earlier. I just did mine, and what I got from doing that and then sipping the Woodford was like a dark cherry kind of sweet.
I was just gonna say that I actually noticed that the Woodford is bringing out a bit of a dark note, a dark fruit note in the cigar.
And that's what I was referencing, like the wine. But I get what you're talking about with cherry. And I got a little bit of it before I smoked. But after smoking the glass itself, what it reminds me of specifically, now that you mentioned cherry, Luxardo cherries.
Yes, that kind of a cherry.
Yeah.
If
Not
you're
like
gonna-
just a black cherry
If
that's
you're going
not...
to get specific,
yeah.
Luxardo cherry, yeah, that kind of sweetness.
I can get that.
Oh yeah, all
The
day long.
aftertaste, yeah.
The nose too.
Mouthful.
It's really interesting how that happens.
You get that on the nose too, big time. That's nice. It's very nice.
Great success.
It's great success.
Well, one of the interesting things that happened in the last week was the Supreme Court,
Not Supreme Court.
not the Supreme, what
Federal court.
the federal court.
District court.
Federal court or district court?
Pat,
Federal
Federal
district
Pat, help,
court.
help me
okay.
out
All
here. Get specific.
one-
You're
it's
the
one
lawyer.
thing.
What the hell happened this week?
So
It was some really good news for the cigar community.
yeah, so the premium cigar, unfortunately, I have to use premium cigar because it's not the premium tobacco. But premium cigars won their 7-year battle against the FDA. It was in federal district court, so it wasn't a Supreme Court. If it was a Supreme Court case, that'd be huge because then you're setting basically the standard for everything. But no, it was just district court. Whenever there's any federal agency issues, it goes to district court and District of Columbia always. So I'll kind of give a quick rendition of what happened because we've talked about it previously on the show. We kind of followed the whole thing. So obviously the 7-year not lawsuit, but challenge under the APA with the FDA with the deeming regulations, and then on August 9th, the regulations pertaining to premium cigars were vacated from Judge Mehta's opinion. So basically, there's kind of a timeline of the of this lawsuits. There's been 3 losses, including this one that the FDA had. So first, after the deeming rule, which the deeming rule basically under the Tobacco Control Act, the FDA, because that's what the FDA's powers derived from to regulate tobacco.
Back in 2016. Yeah.
Yep. So the Tobacco Control Act, the FDA used that to make new regulations for tobacco products, and they kind of just incorporated all cigars into it. So there were 2 options when the rules were announced for the comment period. Option 1 was regulating all tobacco the same, and option 2 was having an exemption for premium cigars, and they had a specific standard for premium cigars, which I don't have it memorized. I can read it if people are interested, but we've talked about that before. So comments came, and there were numerous things that were mentioned. One of them was that the use of premium cigars is different than other tobacco products, and the FDA essentially ignored that and didn't answer the comments or put any data out on how those usage patterns are different or if that changes how they should be regulated. So that's ultimately what bit them in the ass down the road. So step one was court vacating the portion that required the health warning labels back in 2020. We talked about that on the podcast. The other one was just that there was a statutory pre-market scheme for the FDA approving things, and that actually got shot down as well because the FDA didn't look at any less burdensome methods of going through this. And then obviously what happened this past week here. So the big question in this specific case was whether different kinds of cigars may have the potential for varying effects on public health, if there are differences in their effects on youth initiation, and the frequency of their use by youth and young adults. So back to what I said, the FDA just ignored comments on this. So the court held that the regulations were pertaining to premium cigars were arbitrary and capricious. So whenever you, like a citizen or a group under the Administrative Procedure Act, brings an action against an agency, arbitrary and capricious is essentially, it all goes back to separation of powers. You have the legislative branch that grants power to the executive, which is who makes these agencies. There's a principal officer from the executive that runs these agencies. So in order for the agency to actually pass law, because they can't make laws, they have to be doing everything by the hand of the legislative, because the executive enforces law, they don't make law. And then the judicial interprets law. So everything from the Tobacco Control Act, everything has to be linked to that, because that was the congressional intent of what the FDA is doing. So when you're arbitrary and capricious, that essentially means there's no reasonable nexus to what you're doing to wherever your power is derived from. So ignoring comments would be arbitrary and capricious because you're not even linking the chain here. So, and also the APA, like, you have to have a proper comment period. So even if you don't go into the whole separation of powers, you have to do it the right way. And in this case, they didn't. So the burden was on the government to prove that since it was arbitrary and capricious, the battleground was really if the deeming rule should be vacated in its entirety, or if it should be remanded without vacatur, which means they remand it back to the FDA to fix the problems to then enforce the rule. So in that case, the regulations for premium cigars would still be going on while they're fixing it. So there's only an exceptional circumstance where a remand with vacatur is necessary, and that's if the government can prove that the seriousness of the rule's deficiencies were minor, and that the disruptive consequences of vacating the rule would be too much. So the FDA's big arguments were obviously public health, and then a big thing that they had for the inconvenience was potential litigation over the recollection of user fees, which inevitably I think is probably going to happen. So they had kind of a handful of arguments to pinpoint this down. Some of these are actually pretty interesting because I didn't think of it this way. So for the first argument was that the regulations didn't pose a burden on the industry, which funny thing is we talked, I'd say a few months ago about the new regulations that were proposed about the manufacturing side of things. That was actually referenced as a burden, and the judge saw that as a burden because the FDA was saying that it's not a burden because it's just kind of business as usual, but then now they're proposing new intrusive regulations that could really be a cost for the industry if the premium cigars are in this category. So that actually kind of benefited us that they proposed that when they did, because that was referenced in this case. And then one of their other arguments for public health was that as of it being vacated, there's no federal restriction on purchasing premium cigars. So if there's a state that said there's no age limit on premium cigars, then a 1-year-old with their dad's money could come in and buy a cigar. So there's no federal regulation period about cigars, like premium cigars right now, even age restrictions. And then like the rules where it's like reps come in here and you can't give free samples to customers and such. Like unless there's a state law that says that, now they can do that because there's no federal regulation saying that they can't do those things. And then they also, the only argument that had some merit was the false and misleading packaging, because they said now that there's no regulations, now manufacturers can have false and misleading packaging. But again, through the FDA's facts that they put in the case, there's no evidence that that's even a fear, because the FDA never said anything about them having a fear about misleading packaging, so that got shot down. And then obviously the burdensome litigation fees for user fees. But essentially the court shot it all down, and they're like, so it got vacated in its entirety. So the FDA has to make a whole new regulation if they want to regulate premium cigars, and it's got to go through the comment period and all that
So
jazz.
they basically have to start from scratch if
Yep.
they're going to do it again.
Yep.
Yep.
And chances are, they're, that's going to be a long, drawn out, expensive process.
Correct.
It could be. I mean, I was reading Charlie, because I mean, Charlie's not an attorney, but he's been doing
It's been covering
this
this
stuff
for
a long
the
time.
whole time. Yeah.
He thinks that they could do it as early as 2024 if they wanted to, which the FDA really could, because they have the thing that really bit them. So they had, like, the court recognized some of their arguments, but it's the fact that they didn't answer the comments to usage. I'll get the exact language on what they didn't answer to, because that's fairly important. Yeah, so the failure to address was a question of whether premium cigar smokers use the product in a materially different way from non-premium smokers, and whether those material differences might warrant a different regulatory speech. So the way the regulations worded out. And then the FDA ignored data. So that's really what bit them in the ass. So could they salvage some of the research they did and then just put effort towards that? They probably could, and that's why I think 2024, like Charlie's saying, they could propose something. But then one of the questions that Kaz gave me yesterday, that because I had summer brain, I answered atrociously, is if they can appeal. And they can appeal. So the FDA doesn't comment on whether litigation, so you're not going to find out if they're planning on appealing, because I think it's already been asked. But if they appeal, when you do an appeal, like, there's no longer a fact finder. So in this case here, they're still submitting facts about what's going on. So on an appeal, you have the record, and then you have another judge looking at the facts that were already displayed, and they just decide whether or not that judge rendered the right remedy for the party, or whether one should be remedied at all. So I think even if there was a appeal, it's pretty black and white on record that the FDA violated the APA. So I don't think the FDA would appeal unless they just want to prolong this thing. But even if they did, I don't think that would be anything
There's no
worrisome.
benefit to them for that.
Yeah.
It'd be an uphill battle at best.
Yep. So that's really what happened. So if anyone has any more questions on it, I did read into it. I think obviously a big topic would be if this is going to possibly benefit pipe tobacco. And then one of the things I had mentioned yesterday about, because I'll let you, Kaz, talk about the definition of pipe tobacco that the PCA put out. But before that, like, I was just thinking on my own, like, because the only thing that kind of gets left behind on this is flavored cigars, and that's still a big part of the industry. So, like I was telling Kaz yesterday in Germany, that what I would do with that definition is I would add it, and then one of the things it says is no characterizing flavors other than tobacco. I would have an exception to that says, or characterizing flavors that are other than tobacco, not labeled on packaging.
So you wouldn't have a cherry cigar. You would just have, like,
You would have for instance, like, you have Java Red and Java Mint. So Java Mint would be called Java Green.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have the flavor beyond the band.
Yeah.
So I think that would be something the FDA would be interested, because then again, marketing to children gets kind of thrown out. Because through my reading on this, when it comes to the marketing to children, there doesn't have to be facts on whether children are actually buying the product. It's just whether objectively looking at the packaging, you could distinguish that it was marketing to children.
If there is no marketing to children, if children consume the product, it is not the fault of the manufacturer.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make the same argument with, like, there are flavored vodkas out there, fruit flavors, marshmallow, and all that, and some of them have very, like, cartoony art, like, but the fact is, like, they're not explicitly marketing to children. But if a 19, 20-year-old manages to get it and drink it, it's not Smirnoff's fault, like, because they're not targeting that audience.
Right.
And the burden is then on basically anybody else but the manufacturer.
The retailer who didn't card.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why, like, I won't use names, but the only thing that I see being a problem is we definitely have to self-regulate, like the pipe tobacco industry is doing. So, like, not gonna mention the name of the brand, but having like a Krampus. Is that the McDonald's character? Krampus?
Grimace.
Grimace. So having a
Dude,
cigar.
that was like
Krampus
Santa
is the
Claus.
shadow of Saint Nicholas.
Yeah, that's like Santa Claus.
Well,
from, like,
it's the
Europe.
Stillwell
That
Star
would be
that's
really
hitting me
sad
right
if Krampus.
That's
was
like a grimace
purple
that's gone past
So,
the
Like
expiration date.
Krampus doesn't give tobacco products to bad children. He puts them in a sack and beats them with Reeves on
Yeah.
December
So,
5th.
point is though is like,
Yes.
I recently saw a cigar that has Grimace as the band, and that's kind of a like that. If I was
Yeah, that's
the FDA, like that's I'm gonna look at that because you have that new drink from McDonald's or something.
the Grimace shake.
Grimace
The
shake.
Grimace shake. So a lot of the younger generation is kind of the shake's a big deal. It's like that unicorn thing Starbucks did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a current trendy thing for youth, and now you put a cigar out that has that symbol on it. So I don't even think that this company would have an argument against it being marketed to minors.
Yeah,
Even
it's one
though
of those things that even if that wasn't the intention, it's like the
it's the nexus is so tight.
The-
It's just
the appearance of malfeasance is malfeasance in and of itself. Like, be more careful with that. And like, yeah, exactly. And the pipe tobacco industry and not just C&D and stuff, like generally as a whole, has been really good at self-regulating for the most part. And you're right. Like, if you self-regulate, you're not drawing attention because like if you're making every effort to do everything right and ethically and correctly, you're not going to draw the attention of outside powers.
and they're especially like
To-
if the FDA were to start regulating pipe tobacco tomorrow during that comment period, since you guys have been self-regulating and keeping data of how you're self-regulating, like the comments you can submit to them is going to be even harder than the premium cigars were to answer because you have all this oomph behind you. Like, well, this isn't feasible for us because we've been doing something like this and it's been working just fine. So why is there this heightened thing? Like, show us what we're doing wrong to warrant this heightened scrutiny on how we're marketing. And then now they have to answer that. So the fact that you're self-regulating the way you are is, if they do decide to regulate pipe tobacco, it's just going to be even better for you guys to actually.
Yeah, and like minors are not seeking out premium cigars. They're not smoking them. Even if, and I'm not saying this happens, but like they're not pursuing them, they're not buying them, but like even if the thought crosses their minds, when you get into pipe tobacco, like it's not that minors aren't seeking out buying it, like they're not even thinking about it.
Nope.
Right.
Like it is pipe smoking as a whole is such a very, very, very
I mean,
small.
we don't even have Popeye anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
Right.
I mean, like it's
That's why I
classic.
started
I
smoking
was
a pipe.
every Christmas. My grandmother read to me "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Like I still have the book, and like the illustrations, like Saint Nick had a little clay pipe in his mouth, and like that was a line with the pipe like clenched in his teeth, and like modern versions, that imagery's not there, and they've even omitted that line from that poem.
He just has a piece of reed or something. that
Yeah,
he's
and like
chewing on.
really the only like pop culture icon that it's still socially acceptable to depict them with a pipe is Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of anybody else where it's acceptable. And it's just because you can't have Holmes without a pipe. Like it's so intrinsic to the imagery and the identity.
Yep.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
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 But they're
True.
even like they never even reference it being tobacco. Like
Right.
long bottom weed or the finest leaf in the South Farthing. Like
Right.
even then, like there's kind of the impression that it's something that's only found in Middle Earth. Like
Sure.
that it's totally a fantasy. And yeah.
Very, very interesting. So, we need to move along to I want to continue kind of the discussion here, but we kind of need to move along to the
Pipe
the
section.
So, what's the final thoughts here on the Stillwell Star Holiday Y 2022 year 2022?
Well, it's the best Stillwell Star in my opinion. It's damn good. I'm a big fan of the English blend of the Stillwell Star, but this one for me it's like puts it to shame. And nothing against any of the cigars. Me personally, this is the one that I'm gonna keep coming back to. It's full of life, full of flavor, great with a bourbon. Man, Jeremy, bravo, young man, bravo.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's Steve
And Steve, if you're watching,
Wood and
Bravo.
And Steve.
and Steve,
And Steve.
Yeah, this
bravo
is
to you both.
a lot of people put together their work to be able to create these.
Yeah, I mean it's a damn good cigar. Damn good cigar.
Yeah, I think it is too. I think the sweetness and the sort of ever changing notes that you get from the sweeter range of the spectrum, they never overpower the true cigariness of
Yeah, it's still there.
the smoke.
Yep.
It's got nice depth. It's got body. It's got notes of real tobacco forward chocolate, cream notes and things. Yeah, I think it's a nice smoke, and I think it goes beautifully with the whiskey that y'all chose.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a very good pairing.
Yes.
I think so too.
All right. So for our pipe tobacco, we're sticking with the 2022 theme,
Yes, we are.
and we are going for a blend that Jeremy came up with a number of years ago. This was your baby, right? Carolina Red Flake was something that Jeremy developed as a small batch, and this is the 2022 release of that. And one of the themes we've kind of come back to over and over again on the show is how tobacco ages and how that changes things. And one of the things that I have repeatedly heard is that first year of aging is the most noticeable difference, as far as a year to year to year thing. The difference between when it came out and a year later, you're going to notice the most changes. And so you want to talk a little bit about the Carolina Red Flake and what's in it and all that?
Sure, absolutely. So this is made with Eastern North Carolina leaf from let's see, I can't remember the crop year that we did on this. We've done several different versions of this, so I apologize. 20, that's right. So it was the tips.
Just the tips?
Red orange grade from
Just the tip.
from
Damn.
crop year 20. Tips refers to the very upmost top portion of the plant, and they're left on the stalk a little longer. And this particular crop had sort of a surprisingly high sugar content for an upper stalk, darker Virginia leaf. Usually you see, 10 to 11% sugar there, and this actually had 13, almost 14%, which isn't very, very high, but in that grade, that's a percentage that is
Not often seen.
not common.
I have a question, just not to cut you off, because I'm going to forget the question. Because you were saying like upper tip in Virginia. Did Virginia plants have different priming names than what we would say in like cigar leaf
cigars?
tobacco?
Yes. So they roughly correspond, but in U.S. stock positioning or priming, you've got your lugs at the bottom, and then the next quarter up is cutters, and then the next quarter up is what we just call leaf, and then you've got tips, which is basically the ligero.
Very nice.
Is that just because America had a different way of doing it, or because I know like Connecticut tobacco, like they had, I think it was like, what is it, darks, mediums, like medium darks, dark mediums. Like it was a different way of priming.
Well, it's different terminology, but the positions on the stalk are roughly the same.
Oh my God. This is so sweet, so spicy. And it's so good.
One thing, regardless of crop that is used with Carolina Red Flake, I've said over and over that there's like this rye breadiness and like orange, but not like flesh or juice, but like rind or peel or zest. Like there's that bitter element that's
That-
pleasant.
Yes.
Essence of orange.
Yes.
The orange
Yep.
oil.
Yeah.
And that slight bitter bite that you get from it, that's that you like. Like
Very
I'm a big
nice.
fan of like candied orange peel that's been dipped in like dark chocolate. Like take the chocolate away and like that sort of thing that you get
Your pinky
that-
just stuck out when you said that. I was gonna say.
with that really dry rye bread aspect.
There it is.
And I'm just
There's
gonna-
the pinky.
the rest of the
Nice.
podcast. This is just gonna be me.
Wow. Oh wow. The flavor is so intense.
So
So nice.
first question here about, do you notice what's the difference to you between this and what you actually released last year? Do you notice a difference in what's happened?
So I notice that the spice element has really toned down.
Okay.
I also noticed that while you've got that kind of rye bread element that I've always noticed in Carolina Red Flake, and you've got some of that orange sort of essence that Kaz was just talking
Especially
about.
on the retro ale.
That there's also a darker fruit note that seems to be coming up, and you know, we've talked about red wine before, but I actually kind of is reminiscent of me to that. This is my first time smoking this blend in some time. I haven't smoked it since we put out this release last
Okay.
year.
All right.
So yeah, that kind of jumps out to me as a difference. I can begin to see where this is headed in terms of its fermentation. Now, while you know the biggest difference happens over the course of that first year or so in the tin, typically, that's not to say that it's gotten most of the way where it's ultimately getting. It's just the biggest change happens earlier on in the process, and each successive year offers more incremental changes, but those over time can
So like
exceed
smoking this, 5 years from now, it would be very noticeable.
yes, that's right.
10 years from now, very noticeable.
It's just that first year has the largest like dramatic change with a given year, and
Right.
then like the difference between year 1 and year 5 is very dramatic, but it took 5 years to get there.
Right.
So like I wasn't picking up that wine note until you mentioned it, and like like it's almost like that tartness that you'd get from like a Pinot, right? Yep.
Yeah, sweet with a tart note right behind it. And then as that sort of goes away, then you've got that like spicy rye element, and you've got those orange notes sort of spreading out, but there's a creaminess to it. Yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse. This is the
Damn good.
This is the kind
This
of pipe
is
tobacco
really
that I
good
regularly smoke.
So
Yep. I love Virginia's.
kind of jumping back to the FDA discussion, what does that mean, if anything, for pipe tobacco?
So I think this remains really to be seen. Would you agree with that, Pat? That really the ruling has not said anything about any realm of product outside of premium cigars.
Yes, but I mean, I guess if I was hired like tomorrow from the pipe side of the industry to make an argument, I think this fuels a lot of argument. Like you look at one of the big the thing that ultimately shot this down was the habits of use and how the premium cigars are used differently than other tobacco. So I think there's more so of an argument for pipe smoking than premium cigars when it comes to how they're used.
What did they talk about in terms of the habits of use? What did they list? Anything in particular there?
Yeah, so I'm digging deep for this one because this is, I think, the first time I was on the show we talked about this, but it was the ritual of cutting the cigar, knowing how to light it, because as we know, a lot of people don't know how to do either one of them, and you see it firsthand sometimes here. And then the purpose of smoking it, so it's not inhaled and it's tasted. Those were the main distinguishing factors from a premium cigar to other cigars or other tobaccos. So to me, now I know for pipes, if you wanted to inhale pipe tobacco, you'd have a easier job doing so. But that wasn't quoted for cigars where it's dark tobacco leaf, you puke. It was the inhaling It was just, it wasn't that you can't inhale it. It was just, the purpose of smoking it is tasting.
Right.
So pipe
Taste and
tobacco
smell.
has that same argument. So I think it benefits pipe tobacco, again, down the road, if any regulation were to come out of the woodwork.
The same argument that threw it out for cigars throws it out for pipes, but even stronger.
Right.
And I think that, I mean, you talk about the ritual and everything that exists in pipes. Like, pipes
Way
are even
more.
more protracted forms of tobacco consumption than cigars are, and premium cigars are far more protracted than, say, cigarettes or anything that's mass market.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Like,
Plus, I think, like, if you were to regulate pipe tobacco, I mean, maybe I'm just kind of speaking like an idiot now, but I feel like you would have to, because when you buy a cigar, you have the means to smoke it, because, I mean, you can use your fingernail or your teeth to bite it off and just light it. But if you're talking about solely pipe tobacco, like, you can't just buy that tin from someplace and just smoke it. Like, you can't smoke the product on its own.
You need a tool.
you need a tool.
You need a
pipe.
tool. So that's a completely different fact pattern that I think benefits pipes, but I don't even know how that argument would be, like, how the FDA would answer that. If that was a comment, I don't know how they would answer that, because you have to have a tool.
I mean, you can probably speak more to this, Jeremy, because, like, I know what, from my vantage point, being in the industry, what I've seen and heard, and what independent carvers have said and things, but, like, there was an effort by the FDA to try to regulate.
I mean, I think they would say, and certainly we would say, we are currently regulated, and so are pipes.
Yeah, like, they have visited, like, not just factories, but, like, independent artisan carvers, like, have had their workshops visited by FDA agents, like, in their homes.
Yeah, this is not a theoretical thing. This is a currently implemented on everything we do. It has to take into account the regulations as they currently are.
And this is anecdotal, but every time I've heard of that happening, the carver has said to us, like, yeah, they were very clear by their behavior and how they acted. They were out of their depth, and, like, they didn't quite understand the product, or even understand, like, why this, like, how this product can be regulated. It's wood and rubber, or, like, if you have silver, and, like, how do you
It's
regulate
almost like
this?
that's why I think you would have to regulate the.
It'd be like the USDA trying to regulate forks.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
how do you
Right.
do that?
but so that's that's one of the things that I like. So again, to answer the question, I think it does benefit, because then there's just a lot of other nuances of pipe smoking that would derive from the argument that cigars made with habits of use and how they're different than other tobacco products. I think
yeah.
pipe smoking is more different than
Any-
all
Yeah,
tobacco
and-
products. Yeah.
and you've seen it, Kaz. You know, my wife, she drives a Standard, and she's very proud of it. She has a bumper sticker on the back of her car that says, "You can't steal what you can't drive," with all the different gear shifts there, and there's a lot of truth to that. And not that my wife doesn't lock her car, she does. Believe me, I know. I've had to call AAA and have it opened enough. But the argument with with pipes, to me, is there's so much more that you have to do for this. And if you're saying, well, we don't want our youth to get into pipes, well, they're not gonna.
It's not a vape.
You know,
I mean, you have
if
to-
they're going to do something, it's going to be easier than this.
Because smoking, I mean, so there are skills,
It's not instant
learned
gratification.
skills required to smoke a cigar.
And
But to smoke a pipe, like, there are real skills that take time and effort. You have to really want to smoke a pipe in the beginning. I
Right.
always equate it to
Right.
riding a bicycle. Like, how many times did we fall and scrape our knees and hit our heads learning to ride a bike before we got it?
And I've often equated, the whole cigar pipe thing to, cigars are like driving an automatic, and pipe smoking is like driving a Standard. Yes, there's more work to it, but if you take the time to do that, driving a Standard, I know how to drive a Standard.
second
I
nature.
enjoy driving a Standard. I enjoy the feel of it and the doing of it. And yes, there are times when you're in a traffic and you're going uphill and you have to keep everything, but it's an enjoyable thing, and having that much control over things, can be very, very good.
It's
And
rewarding
so,
too because
and-
you have that much control.
right. And so with a pipe, you do have that. You're controlling what you're smoking, what flavors you're getting. You decide what goes into the pipe. You can mix your own stuff. Do you like a tighter draw, looser draw? Do you want it to last 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour? You have all that control, which you do not have with a cigar. With a cigar, you take somebody's finished piece of work, you light it up, and you enjoy it for what it is.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
But with a pipe, you're taking somebody's finished work, and then you take that and put it into something yourself. You're adding your own
Personal
taste and touch to what you're doing, making your own thing. And so it's like more like
It's like regulating a paintbrush.
you're more involved. You're more involved with it.
You know.
And that's not something not only have I not really seen underage people intentionally coming to try and skeeve their way into a cigar, but I have never, ever seen somebody, even a sting operation from the local FDA, come up with a tin of pipe tobacco.
And if they did, it would be immediately suspect. Like,
Yeah.
That's why if I had to predict if the FDA would ever regulate pipe tobacco, it would be good news for pipe. I feel like that would mean that pipe tobacco has grown so much culturally, where a lot more people are doing it, to where now the FDA is like, okay, now we because like right now, if you were to try to do a regulation, like if they're gonna get data on habits of use, and who are they gonna pull for that?
and I'm not saying this would
Like
necessarily
the pipe
happen.
club, you're gonna have the FDA come in, and Dan's gonna be doing a pipe club.
But when you
Oh, yeah.
look at what
I can see that
happened
happening.
to like whiskey in the U.S. before there were any regulations, when they applied regulations to whiskey and alcohol, because like there were no regulations, people were cutting corners, people were buying whiskey from a store. We're not talking like bathtub gin and like going blind or like regulation can raise overall quality.
Yep.
And like once you set a standard for something, you're going to have a lot of the substandard product go away or raise their quality. And going back to what you're saying, like you have to, like, you have that much control and like having to learn to drive a standard. And then there's like that joy in doing it. Once you get there, because I feel like I made it sound like this really difficult, arduous process. Like it's the initial learning. But even though there is more effort initially involved with learning and there is more like moving parts, I don't have any more active or conscious thought when smoking a pipe than I do a cigar.
No.
Like
me
you,
neither.
once you like get your head around it, like you don't do any of it consciously. You just do it. It's like once you become proficient with smoking a cigar, you're not looking for just the right spot on the cap to clip and making sure you're toasting even. Like you're talking to someone hardly looking and you're doing it. That's right.
Right.
Plus, even like one of the things I think about is like the whatever is going on with the spending for the FDA right now, where it was proposed not touching flavored cigars or setting nicotine limits for cigars. So I wonder, since that's all under the umbrella of tobacco, I think it would be different categories for different types of products. But since obviously there's a lot more nicotine in a cigar than pipe tobacco, but you just don't.
Usually, yeah.
So when it comes to pipe tobacco, like, is there a set limit that you guys self-regulate when it comes to nicotine content, or is it just kind of you guys like a pipe tobacco blend just won't go to like a high nicotine content?
No, I mean
you certainly can. I mean,
there are a
use
number
really,
of blends
really
I'm
strong
thinking of that
tobaccos
I've never had a cigar that strength. Like the last time I was on, it was March. We talked about the Gay with Hogarth rope tobacco.
Yeah.
One of my personal favorite tobaccos is 1792 Flake. Those two tobaccos are the ropes are a few different blends, but those tobaccos, I have never smoked a single cigar that came close to the nicotine of one bowl of those tobaccos.
Yeah.
And that's what you have so much history and like cultural variations in pipe tobacco, where like these tobaccos started in Britain in the 17 and 1800s, but then you have like these aromatics that became popular in the 60s and 70s out of Denmark, and you have like even back to England, like what people commonly call English mixtures, but they're more like London style mixtures that incorporate a lot of Turkish varieties and Latakia. Like, people think they're really strong because of that smoky nature.
Right.
English blends have virtually very little nicotine in them. It's about flavor and boldness. So you have so many geographical and time periods being pulled from for pipe tobacco. And you also have many varied curing methods, from pressure fermentation, smoke curing, air curing, sun curing, that largely can impact nicotine content. Whereas with very little variance, all cigar tobacco is dark air cured, or air cured to some degree. Like, you don't have flue cured cigar tobacco. And so there's more, even though you have geographical and like fermentation periods that can impact flavor before you get to the blend impacting flavor, you're in a much narrow family, or much like vein, whereas pipe tobacco is massive in variances.
So I'm gonna bring us so off topic, as you mentioned something that just kind of got my gears going. So when I was at the barn smoke I went to, Pedro was talking to us, because I mean, you're in Connecticut, you see the tobacco fields, and like one of the things I always thought to myself, like before going, was like at least like my layman's view of tobacco is like, in America it was like a huge part of our early agriculture to get us to be like, you know, what we are today. And he actually, when we were there, was talking to us about, he forgot the guy's name, but it's John something. It was like History Channel segment for tobacco.
Roth.
I think so. Virginia, St. James.
So what was smoked in the colonies originally was wild tobacco, but what he brought seeds from Trinidad and grew them.
And then grew them in Virginia.
And that's the only reason Jamestown colony survived.
Yeah, and then he was just saying, like, it started from like a few lots of tobacco to hundreds of lots to thousands, and then like that, when we started exporting tobacco is when, like, you know, like in the winters, like our mortality rates were lowering because people we were getting the resources now because we were. So I just look, and they called it green gold is what they were calling it. And I just like look at like today, where like this big pillar of our agricultural history and like what really built this country is just so scrutinized amongst everyone.
So like, to add to that, Jamestown was not the first British colony. There were many failed ones before, because it was, they were not viable.
It was in 1604, I think, around that time, 1604.
It was in the 17th century for sure.
I think it was he said Pedro could have been wrong.
17th century is 1600s.
Yes. I mean, 1604 or 5, that sounds right.
Yeah. So like, that's the only reason Jamestown survived, and like they were able to expand colonization, which eventually became like the original 13 colonies. But added to that, it was not only so important in Britain getting a foothold here and surviving with their colonies, but George Washington even sent a letter to the Continental Congress, send money, because they were getting ready for the revolution. Like, our independence was, they needed money. He said, if you can't send money, send tobacco, because it was just as good as money. And so
Sounds like a letter from a college kid.
yeah, like, send beer money or send beer. Like, but that was like, but he was serious. He's like, send money, and if you can't send money, send tobacco. It was just as good. And so not only with like establishing the very beginning, like the fact that we were able to fund a revolution and able to gain independence and get a foothold as an independent nation can be like tied directly to tobacco.
And now you say that, like, I went, one of my DC visits before COVID, I went to, I forget what they call the actual estate, but it was George Washington's house. It was
Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon, yeah. If you go into his, what would be considered his living room, the wooden borders in the ceiling is like
cave.
all the agriculture, and it has like corn, there's tobacco leaves, like it's like such a deep rooted thing in American history. It just like, it just boggles my mind that it's like getting killed, you know, like it's like, even like we were talking, there's only a few cigar tobacco growers that grow like Connecticut shade now. It's all in Ecuador because the cost of labor to tie the cheesecloth, to do the prime, it's too much money. So it's like, And there's only a couple cigars I can think of on the market that use like a true Connecticut. And then the
Yeah.
reason why like Connecticut broadleaf prospers so much is because they stock cut it. So it's like it's the labor is dwindled down. It's still very tedious, hard stuff, like completely, But when it comes to like how they do other types of tobacco, like that's why broadleaf is like literally American's tobacco because it's just the costly.
You see it in a lot of varieties used for pipe tobacco production in the United States too. You were just talking about burley. Like there's tons less grown every year, and that's a labor-intensive process too.
Yeah, millions of pounds fewer grown every year.
And then you guys probably import them, right? Like from different.
We do, but so for burley, our primary sources for burley are U.S. still. It's just tougher and tougher to get all the time.
It's competitive.
Yeah.
What are you guys thinking about the Woodford with the Red Flake?
It totally transformed the way that I feel like this tobacco tastes, but I also feel like the tobacco had a real effect on the way that I'm tasting the whiskey.
It was a very different effect
Yes.
than from the cigar, right?
Yes. I notice a lot less of the sweetness of the whiskey because by comparison to the cigar, I felt like the whiskey was sweeter. By comparison to the tobacco, I don't feel that way.
It's drier, and instead of like that Luxardo cherry note, I'm getting something like it's a flavor I'm familiar with, but I can't quite identify it. But the closest thing that's coming to mind that I can relate to is like a dried cranberry,
Okay.
but slightly more bitter than that. And I've had this. I'm thinking of, but I can't think of like what is that flavor. But there is this like bitter fruit note.
Okay.
That's not citrus. That's not
I'm picking up a lot more of the woody character.
Yeah, it gets
Of the
much
bourbon.
more woody to me.
Yeah, whereas before I was picking up the sweetness and the spiciness.
Yep.
I'm getting a lot more of the charred notes,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot more of just the wood itself.
Now, what the tin says you use top tier Virginias.
Correct.
What does that mean? What qualifies the tobacco to be in a blend like Carolina Red Flake?
Sure. So part of that is primings and gradings, but part of that is our own internal assessment of tobacco, and I'm looking for something that is not just visually beautiful, but something that is consistent through the lot, color, leaf size, and overall complexity of flavor. So usually with grading with tobacco, I mean, there's an element of it that is just sort of spreadsheety, and then there's a whole bunch of things that like you can't tell without just
It's a mix of science and art.
flavor assessment.
Yeah.
You
can't-
were mentioning a red that I believe is incorporated in the next small batch that's coming out for consumers next week. It's
Yeah,
a brand new blend.
that-
Steamworks, try it. But
that
it's
Georgian leaf.
where it has correct me here if I'm wrong, but it has a lower sugar percentage than another red in the blend. But it tastes sweeter on the palate.
Yeah, there's just something about the chemical structure of this leaf, and I don't even really know how to account for it. To me, it's just like this is magic. So we have a Canadian bright leaf that we commonly use that can range in sugar content. We've had at the highest that C&D has been able to source 28% of the weight of this tobacco is reducing sugar. Currently, what we're using sits right around 25%, but roughly the same grade year on year. You just crop differences, and so there's a leaf that was grown in Georgia. It's sort of a red-orange leaf grown in Georgia that is in this blend Steamworks that's coming up, that has 17% sugar, which is that's a damn sight lower than 25. But smoking it seems like almost Splenda levels of sweetness. Like
Wow.
it's very, very pleasant to smoke, but not in a. I wouldn't ever smoke a large bowl of it because it's actually so intensely sweet on its own that it kind of gets to a point of being too much. It kind of gets to a point of being cloying. And
Diabetes.
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 so, I don't know how to account for that. Looking at it on paper, you would expect that the 25% bright would be much sweeter, would come across as being much sweeter than the Georgian with 17% sugar. But somehow that 17% comes out much, much palpably more sweet.
And I just completely guessing, ignorant, like ballpark. Like I'm wondering if it's something like with minerality in the soil there, because like
Sure.
if you throw a little, this is a southern thing, don't knock it till you try it. Putting a little salt on your fresh watermelon makes it sweeter.
Sure. Or
And
putting a little salt in your brownies.
Yes. And I'm wondering if there's just something like with the soil, because you see that largely impact cigars, wine quality
Yes.
grapes. Like if there's something there that's not in the Carolinas or Virginia or Canada that allows that sugar content, modest as it is, to really pop.
Sure. And certainly possible. This came from one particular farm. I do know that, and so it could also be a characteristic of the particular soil on that particular plot of land.
Or even the weather that crop year, because like vintners, like they prefer dry years because they say that the grapes need to suffer a little bit, because if there's a lot of rain, it's not as rich, it's not as sweet. Like you need just enough rain to keep these grapes from like spoiling or dying, because it concentrates that intensity. And maybe it could be a factor of all these things, but it could have just been the annual rainfall.
It could have been. Now with sugar and nicotine in Virginia's, those are sort of not exactly perfect, but they're sort of a counterbalance to one another.
Right.
And in tobacco, you expect that you'll see higher sugar content in wetter years and higher nicotine in drier years.
Okay. Interesting.
But nicotine, if you think about the function that nicotine serves, it's a protection to the seeds of
It's
the
a
plant.
natural pesticide, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Really?
So
That's interesting.
nicotine saturates the plant as it begins to develop flowers. And so if you're trying to preserve nicotine in the plant, you want to wait until it develops flower, but you don't want it to go to seed.
Oh.
If it goes to seed,
All those sugars go.
all
To
the
the seeds,
nicotine,
yeah.
all the nicotine
protect
ends
it,
up
yeah.
basically just being a coating on the seeds.
Oh wow.
So to preserve nicotine in the plant, you want to first have the flower so that nicotine has begun to saturate, and then you want to cut the flower off so that nicotine has nowhere to go.
Oh.
But
Nice.
if you allow it to run its course, all that nicotine, or the vast majority of it, will end up basically just as a coating on the seeds, so that birds come eat the seeds, and their bodies reject the nicotine coating it, and so that it will then survive in its droppings and pass
Replant.
on,
Yep.
pass on and become a new tobacco plant. So in drier years, there's more nicotine produced because the plant is like, all right, well, I'm probably not going to make it. So I need to work harder to try and just reproduce and protect the next generation. Whereas in wetter years, the
They're
purpose that the
thriving.
sugar serves is as an internal sort of energy source to be able to seek out nutrients in the sandier soil that Virginia tobacco grows in. So in wetter years, those nutrients are drawn to the plant more easily, so it has more excess sugar. So that sugar ends up being a part of the chemistry of the plant itself rather than being burned off developing energy.
Wow.
Or creating energy.
Yeah, nicotine is like I know eggplant has it. There's a lot of things that we eat
Yeah.
that produce
Tomatoes
nicotine.
have it.
Yep.
Yeah, for that reason.
Yeah, I really want to like have a T-shirt made or something with like a nicotine warning label on a
Eggplant?
stack of tomatoes.
Should be
Warning: this product
tomato
contains
pipe
nicotine with
tobacco,
an
yeah.
eggplant emoji.
Right.
Oh boy, that'll get over well. I'll buy 10 of those, please.
Well, what's our final thoughts here on the Carolina Red Flake 2022?
I love my Carolinas. I love.
I mean, it's delicious. I don't remember it being this intense though when I first hit the tin.
It's
When we
definitely
first got
developed.
it. I mean, the aging, just 1 year, is completely changed it. It's fantastic. Out of all of them, I mean, they're all fantastic. That was probably the least one that I'd pick up. It would be the other ones. But I mean, with a year on it, wow, has it changed.
And can we say, like, all this complexity, this isn't a blend. Like, this is, like, you found this phenomenal leaf and wanted to do something with it. And, like, it is very rare, almost unheard of, to have this level of complexity and nuance in a single variety. Like, that's how rare it is. And how, like, speaking of top tier, like,
Yeah.
Damn.
The grade that started off Carolina Red Flake was
L2D8.
L2DH 15, or
What the heck?
It
does
had a
that mean?
15 in
yeah,
it.
it was 15.
Sounds like a prescription.
So it's leaf, second quality because it had some other color variations in the lot. And so, people think of grading and it's like, good, bad, or like, better or worse, whatever. But it's more a descriptor of the qualities of a particular lot.
Okay.
You can have something
tobacco.
too pure.
Yeah.
Like, I like grade B maple syrup better than grade A. And, like, because you have a little bit more complexity and nuance and, well, it's hard. You can't find it in, like, a grocery store, supermarket, because nobody wants something called grade B. And, like, to me, it tastes better. Like, you can have something that is... So a lot of people don't realize, like, when you buy, like, pure vanilla extract, it's good quality, it's well made, but it's
a different kind of flavor.
it's
so-
monotonous.
yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's there's
So-
no complexity there,
it's
nothing
so
interesting.
refined.
Yes, and you need a little bit of something there to make it pop, make it interesting, make it good. And yeah,
Yep. So this was a grade that I was actually not. I was asking a leaf purveyor for samples because we had a Red Virginia grade that's sort of our our standard Red Virginia that we use in most of our blends. That was we had about a year left supply, and so I needed to start sourcing something to replace it to begin working in. So that we can continue to make all of the blends that we do, and keep those things consistent. And so I got several samples. I think we had 10 or 12 samples from them, and one of them was this this 5-pound sort of slab of leaf, grade L2DH. And the second that I tasted it, I was like, all right, well, this is not the grade I'm looking for. But I was blown away by the uniqueness of the flavor profile. I was blown away by the sweetness, and I was blown away by this particular note of rye bread. And I just was like, all right, well, this isn't what I'm looking for to replace our mainstay Red Virginia, but this is definitely something that I'm looking for to do something with. And that ended up being the first Carolina Red Flake. So as we've continued to produce this, it's been a different grade nearly each time. At this point, we were able to produce 2 runs of L2DH, and then we switched to a new grade that was very, very similar. And then after that, we started branching out a little more. This is the most dramatic branching out of any of the grade variations that we've used for Carolina Red Flake.
Now, you said earlier in the show that you're doing a Carolina Red Flake with Perique again this year.
That's correct.
What's the rationale for switching, between those releases? Is it just, does it have to do with what's available or what's the rationale for it? I won't try and guess.
Sure. Pretty much it's just that we kind of are shifting to speccing out our release schedule earlier in the years. And so we did Carolina Red Flake last year, and we have enough small batch blends to be able to sort of have a cycle through, so we're not coming back year after year with something. Part of it is part of it means that we're not trying to source the same style of tobaccos over and over and over again, but part of it is just to provide people with some variation and something different in the market, rather than just offering the same things over and over and over again.
And honestly, that makes it even more special because it's not
Right.
like, it's getting this time this year, so get ready for
Right.
It's dictated not only by the selection and trying to keep things special and enjoyable, but also it's dictated by availability. Like if you come through and it's like, you know what, this is a really good Virginia, but I don't think this is like to the standard we've set for Carolina Red Flake. So we'll do something with this over here, but this year, like, we have got this exceptional Sun Bear honey. Let's do something special with it. And so it's kind of like going to like one of those really nice like farm to table restaurants that like you're not going to get like your side vegetable with your entree is not going to be out of season. It's not something that came from across the country, or it's like what is in season in this area. And like I think that has that way of thinking does get incorporated in the small batch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
So glad you're here. So glad you took the time to be on the podcast with us.
Oh,
I think it's
my
great
pleasure.
to have you here.
Thank you.
And I understand you're coming back next year for another day here.
I believe
Another
so.
dinner. We didn't even talk about that. We had, Jeremy was here for our big August Pipe Club event, Savinelli and Peterson Pipe Show, and tequila with Jeremy. That was fantastic. And then the dinner, which was sold out, which did really, really well. The food was phenomenal.
It was so good.
Shout
out Edgar.
Yeah, Edgar did such a great job.
He really did.
The food
kebabs.
quality, like I've said, like I've gone to places and without the amazing like tobacco demonstration and that educational thing, and without the beverage pairings, because there were beverage pairings with each course, I have gone to restaurants not including the beverage pairings, done like 4-course dinners, and there is no way I've ever gotten a meal of that quality for what a ticket to one of these dinners cost. And that's not including the beverage pairings and like Jeremy talking about the tobacco and you getting the free tobacco pairings. Like it's
And everyone left with a tin of Dexter's Secret.
Yeah.
The English blend of Briary blends.
Not
Yeah.
to mention just the lovely weather that we had,
Yeah.
and the beautiful view from the deck,
And that was
great company.
I know we talked about it before, but it's just so funny how all of our outdoor cigar events have had to come inside because of weather. And the 2 outdoor pipe events we had planned had perfect weather outside on the deck.
That tells you something.
Just kind of funny. Just kind of funny. But
Pastor Dave didn't give me the moniker of Warlock for nothing, man.
No. But thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to having you back, and hopefully it's sooner than next August. We'd love to have you back sooner than that.
Oh, he's caught the sickness that I have, that where it's like it's a struggle to go to the airport when it's time to leave.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. And that's not just blowing smoke.
Stay smoky, my friends.